They laughed when Leo spent his last $500 on a rusted, abandoned Mustang. His wealthy boss called him a total loser, and his own fiancé threw her engagement ring into the mud, leaving him for a millionaire on the exact same day. But inside that rusted, neglected metal lay a dark secret that was never supposed to be found. A secret that would soon make Leo the most powerful man in the corporate world and force his enemies to beg for his mercy on their knees. Watch this video until the very final second, because the calculated, legal way Leo used this piece of scrap metal to completely demolish a multi-billion-dollar empire will change the way you look at garbage forever. Hello, my friends. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments which country you are watching from. Leo was a brilliant automotive restorer, but in the eyes of society, he was invisible. For 5 long years, he spent 14 hours a day inhaling paint fumes and wiping grease at Vanguard Motors. This was the most prestigious luxury vehicle restoration shop in the entire city. It was owned by a ruthless, arrogant billionaire named Arthur. Arthur was a man who measured human worth solely by the balance in their bank account. He didn't just underpay Leo, he made it his personal mission to humiliate him daily in front of high-profile clients. Leo stayed because he loved cars and because he desperately needed to build a future. He was planning to marry Brenda, his fiancée of 3 years, but Brenda was growing increasingly cold and impatient. She didn't want a life of budgeting, she wanted the flashing lights of luxury. One stormy Tuesday afternoon, an old, broken farmer towed a heavily rusted, severely dented 1967 Mustang into the garage. The car was an absolute wreck. The floorboards were practically gone, the engine block was seized, and rust had eaten through the beautiful classic lines. Arthur took one look at it and roared with laughter. He told the old farmer that he would have to pay Vanguard Motors just to haul this piece of garbage to the scrapyard. But Leo didn't laugh. His expert eyes caught something highly unusual. There was a thick, non-standard factory weld near the vehicle's firewall, covered by a strange, heat-resistant coating. It wasn't a repair job. It looked like a military-grade modification. Something deep inside Leo's soul screamed that this car was a hidden puzzle. Leo stepped forward, defying his boss. He pulled out his wallet, took out his last $500, his entire rent money, and offered it to the farmer. The farmer accepted immediately, handing over the old keys. Arthur's face turned bright red with mocking laughter. He clapped his hands and announced to the entire shop that Leo was officially the stupidest man alive. Right at that exact devastating moment, Brenda walked into the garage. She had come to ask Leo for money for an expensive dress. Seeing her fiancé hand over his final savings for a pile of worthless orange rust was the breaking point. She screamed in pure disgust. Brenda pulled off her engagement ring, threw it directly into the muddy puddle at Leo's feet, and walked straight into Arthur's glass luxury office. By the time the sun went down, Leo was fired by Arthur, left completely homeless and abandoned by the woman he loved. He stood in the pouring rain, staring at a rusted car that wouldn't even start. Leo refused to let the darkness consume him. He used his remaining energy to tow the rusted Mustang to an old abandoned barn owned by his late grandfather, located miles outside the city limits. The barn was cold, damp, and smelled of old hay, but it was a sanctuary. Leo had no money left for food. His stomach burned with hunger, but his obsession to uncover the truth behind that strange military weld was far stronger than his physical pain. He set up a single halogen lamp, grabbed his grinder, his heavy hammer, and his wire brushes, and began tearing down the vehicle. He worked for 3 days straight without sleeping, stripping away layers of rust, old paint, and decades of neglect. On the 4th night, as the clock struck 3 a.m., Leo began dismantling the dashboard and the glove box area. As he cut through a secondary steel layer behind the radio compartment, his grinder sparked violently against something incredibly hard. It wasn't regular automotive steel. It was a reinforced titanium plate. Leo carefully used his specialized tools to unscrew the heavy plate. Hidden inside a hollow chamber was a thick, completely waterproof, military-grade black leather pouch. It was sealed with a heavy brass lock. With shaking, grease-stained hands, Leo used a chisel to break the lock. He expected to find old vehicle registrations or perhaps a stash of old cash. Instead, his eyes widened as he pulled out a heavy leather-bound corporate ledger and a highly unusual, heavy silver micro-storage drive from the late 1980s. Leo was not just a mechanic. He had spent years studying computer science and digital encryption before poverty forced him into the garage. He plugged the ancient drive into his old battered laptop. The screen flashed with a red warning, classified encryption system. The security protocol was decades old, but it was incredibly complex. Leo spent the next 36 hours writing custom brute force code, surviving only on tap water. Finally, the laptop emitted a sharp beep. The encryption cracked. The files opened. As Leo scrolled through the old digital documents, financial statements, and secret corporate contracts, his breath completely hitched. This car had never belonged to a random farmer. It had belonged to a man named Arthur Pendleton Sr., the brilliant founder of Vanguard Motors and the biological father of Leo's former boss. And according to these files, the entire billionaire empire Arthur owned was built on a massive, terrifying crime. The hidden files painted a chilling picture of corporate greed and betrayal. Back in 1988, Arthur's father, the original founder, had invented a revolutionary, highly efficient, eco-friendly engine prototype that could run for hundreds of miles on a fraction of regular fuel. It was an invention worth billions, capable of changing the entire global automotive industry. But Arthur, his young and greedy son, didn't want to wait for testing and regulations. He wanted immediate wealth. Arthur had secretly partnered with corrupt oil investors, forged his own father's signature on massive transfer documents, and committed an elaborate corporate coup. To permanently silence his father, Arthur used his massive wealth to bribe corrupt medical officials, branding his father as mentally unstable and locking him away in a secure, private psychiatric facility under a fake name. The father had anticipated his son's betrayal, but didn't have time to go to the police. Before he was forcibly taken away, he hid the original, genuine patent rights, the unforged founding signatures, and the access keys to an offshore reserve bank account containing hundreds of millions of dollars inside his personal, custom-built 1967 Mustang. He then paid a loyal farm worker to hide the car for decades. This meant one terrifying thing. Arthur did not legally own a single brick of Vanguard Motors. Every luxury showroom, every bank account, and every asset belonged legally to the rightful holder of the physical patent papers. As Leo read the final legally binding testament written by the father before his disappearance, his heart pounded against his ribs. The document explicitly stated that if no direct biological heirs remained free, the absolute ownership of the entire corporation, the patents, and the accumulated billions would immediately legally transfer to the finder of the vehicle, provided they possessed the physical documents and the encrypted digital keys. Leo realized he wasn't holding a piece of junk. He was holding a legal weapon that could obliterate Arthur's entire existence. But Leo knew he couldn't just walk into a regular police station. Arthur was too powerful. He had top-tier legal teams, politicians, and judges in his pocket. If Leo exposed his hand too early, the evidence would disappear and Leo would vanish forever. He needed a brilliant, cold, and legally watertight trap. He needed Arthur to willingly walk into his own destruction. Leo spent the next 3 weeks working on a double strategy, transforming the car and setting the legal trap. He didn't just repair the Mustang, he restored it with absolute perfection, using the hidden blueprints found in the pouch. He rebuilt the revolutionary eco-engine to its exact, flawless specifications. Outwardly, the car looked like a pristine, breathtaking museum piece, painted in a deep, hypnotic midnight black. Inwardly, it was a technological marvel. While doing this, Leo used the offshore account access keys to quietly withdraw a small fraction of the untouched funds, completely legally as the authorized trustee of the estate. He used the capital to hire the most feared, incorruptible corporate law firm in the country, a firm that Arthur's money could never buy. Leo instructed his legal team to quietly buy up all of Vanguard Motors' secondary debts and hidden liabilities. Arthur had been living lavishly, taking out massive, high-interest loans against his company's stock to fund his billionaire lifestyle. Leo quietly became Arthur's primary creditor without Arthur ever knowing his name. To complete the trap, Leo needed Arthur to publicly commit to a massive, irreversible financial gamble. Leo used an anonymous shell company to announce a global classic automotive restoration competition with a massive $10 million grand prize to be held in the heart of the city. The rule of the competition was strict. The winner takes all, but the losers must sign over the full titles of their competing vehicles to the winner. Arthur, whose ego was larger than his intellect, saw this as the ultimate marketing opportunity to prove Vanguard Motors was supreme. He immediately entered his finest multi-million-dollar hypercar. He even boasted on national television that he would personally crush any amateur who dared to enter. Meanwhile, Brenda, who was now Arthur's personal secretary and trophy companion, appeared on social media, mocking poor men who couldn't afford luxury. Leo watched the news broadcast from his dark barn, a cold, sharp smile forming on his face. The bait was taken. The day of the grand Automotive Exposition arrived. The city's massive convention center was packed with thousands of wealthy investors, international journalists, and elite car enthusiasts. The atmosphere was electric. Arthur arrived like royalty, flanked by security guards and accompanied by Brenda, who looked down her nose at the crowd. Arthur's flagship car was unveiled on a rotating velvet platform, a heavily customized modern vehicle worth $5 million. The crowd cheered, and the judges were visibly impressed. Arthur openly declared to the cameras that the competition was already over and that no one in the world could match his company's engineering. Just as the judges were about to close the evaluation, a deep, thunderous exhaust note echoed through the massive concrete hall. The sound was unlike anything anyone had ever heard, a deep, muscular purr that shook the floorboards. The crowd parted, a transporter truck opened, and out rolled the midnight black 1967 Mustang. It moved with an ethereal elegance, its paint reflecting the overhead lights like liquid glass. The crowd gasped. The design was timeless, but the sound of the engine indicated a power that seemed almost impossible. The door of the Mustang opened. Out stepped a man wearing a bespoke, custom-tailored charcoal suit, polished Italian shoes, and an air of absolute, unshakable authority. It was Leo. He looked immaculate, his posture straight, his eyes cold as ice. The entire room went dead silent. Arthur's jaw dropped in absolute disbelief. Brenda staggered backward, her hands flying to her mouth as she stared at the man she had thrown into the mud just 30 days ago. He was no longer the dirty, grease-covered mechanic. He looked like a king returning to claim his throne. Arthur recovered from his shock, his face contorting with absolute rage. He stormed forward, pointing a finger at Leo, screaming that a fired loser had no right to stand on the same stage as a billionaire. Leo didn't raise his voice. He simply smiled, looked directly into the news cameras, and challenged Arthur to let the judges inspect the mechanical heart of both vehicles. The head judges, who were world-renowned automotive engineers, began their rigorous inspection of Leo's Mustang. When they lifted the hood, they didn't find a standard vintage engine. They found a beautifully integrated, hyper-advanced eco-engine that matched schematics that had been lost to history. The lead judge connected a digital diagnostic scanner to the car. As the metrics appeared on the giant overhead screens for the entire audience to see, a collective gasp rippled through the stadium. The engine efficiency was mathematically perfect. It produced 0 emissions while generating twice the horsepower of Arthur's $5 million hypercar. It was an engineering miracle. The judges didn't even hesitate. They stepped onto the main podium and officially announced Leo's 1967 Mustang as the undisputed, unanimous winner of the grand prize and the ultimate title of the exhibition. The crowd erupted into deafening applause. Arthur's face turned from pale to an ugly, bright purple. According to the legally binding, pre-signed competition rules, Arthur had to immediately hand over the legal title of his multi-million-dollar flagship car to Leo. Arthur screamed at his security guards to look for fraud, claiming Leo must have stolen the technology from Vanguard Motors. Leo calmly walked up to the microphone on the center stage. His voice echoed clearly through the massive speakers, silencing the entire room. He looked directly at Arthur and said, "I didn't steal this technology, Arthur. This engine was invented 30 years ago by the true founder of Vanguard Motors, the man you betrayed, the man you locked away in an asylum just to satisfy your own disgusting greed." The entire journalism pool went into a frenzy, flashbulbs exploding rapidly. Arthur shook with fear, shouting that Leo had no proof and that he would sue him for defamation. Leo calmly reached inside his tailored jacket and pulled out a certified legal folder. He raised it high for the world to see and announced, "I don't just have proof, Arthur. I have the original, unforged founding patents, and more importantly, I have a federal court order." Before Arthur could attempt to flee the stage, a team of federal agents in dark suits, accompanied by senior corporate lawyers, marched into the convention hall. The lead attorney from Leo's premium law firm stepped onto the podium and took the microphone. He announced to the press and the public that a federal asset freeze had just been executed against Arthur Pendleton and Vanguard Motors. The lawyers explained that the original founding documents and the encrypted digital ledger discovered inside the 1967 Mustang had been thoroughly verified by federal forensic experts over the past 2 weeks. The evidence of massive corporate fraud, forgery, and the illegal institutionalization of the true founder was absolute and completely undeniable. Furthermore, because Leo was the legal holder of the physical patent keys and the designated trustee of the original estate, and because Leo's shell company had quietly purchased 100% of Vanguard Motors' outstanding debt, Leo was now legally the absolute owner of Vanguard Motors. Arthur was no longer a billionaire. He was completely bankrupt, stripped of his titles, his wealth, and his properties in a matter of seconds. Arthur collapsed to his knees right on the stage, weeping openly as federal agents stepped forward and placed heavy steel handcuffs around his wrists, arresting him for multi-million-dollar corporate fraud and criminal conspiracy. The crowd watched in absolute awe as justice was delivered live on national television. Brenda, seeing her luxury world completely disintegrate, frantically ran up to the stage toward Leo. She put on a fake, tearful smile, trying to grab his hand, claiming she had only left him to motivate him and begging him to take her back. Leo slowly pulled his hand away, looking at her with total indifference. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the silver engagement ring that she had thrown into the mud 30 days prior, which he had cleaned, and quietly dropped it back into her hand. He looked her in the eyes and said, "You told me you didn't want a man with grease under his nails. Now you don't even deserve the dust from my tires." The aftermath of the legal storm completely reshaped the automotive world. Leo's first act as the sole owner and CEO of the newly restructured Pendleton Leo International was to immediately release Arthur's elderly father from the private medical facility. Leo provided him with the best medical care, a beautiful estate, and restored his rightful name to the history books. The old man, crying tears of gratitude, officially signed over the permanent global chairmanship of the entire multi-billion-dollar corporation to Leo, stating that Leo was the son his biological child should have been. Under Leo's visionary leadership, the company began mass-producing the eco-engine, revolutionizing global transportation, reducing pollution, and creating thousands of high-paying jobs for honest, hard-working mechanics who were treated with the utmost respect. Leo never forgot where he came from. He built free technical academies for young, impoverished students who possessed talent but lacked opportunity. Arthur was sentenced to 25 years in a federal maximum security prison with absolutely no possibility of parole, his name forever synonymous with greed and failure. Brenda disappeared from high society entirely, forced to work a low-paying, grueling job at a remote highway gas station just to pay her rent, spending her nights watching news broadcasts of her former fiancé dominating the global business world. One beautiful evening, Leo stood on the penthouse terrace of his massive corporate headquarters, looking out over the glittering skyline of the city. Below him, parked in a private illuminated glass display case in the center of the main lobby, was the midnight black 1967 Mustang. It was no longer a piece of rusted metal discarded in the mud. It was a permanent monument to patience, brilliant strategy, and absolute unyielding justice. Leo took a slow sip of his water, turned around, and walked into a future that he had built with his own 2 hands.